this regard.
Well, the key there is he's on. Trump's on the phone with Netanyahu, but he's not on the phone with the Iranians. You see, that's the problem. So he's not talking to the Iranians. So anytime Trump puts out a truth or makes a statement like, "We're very close to a deal. We're very close. They want to make a deal. We want to make a deal. It's going to happen. It's going to happen real soon. Real soon." When you hear that, it's basically they're fumbling around in Washington, playing games with the press, playing games with this stupid platform, ridiculous Truth Social. The name of it is just oxymoronic, but that's the point. They're working through intermediaries, Pakistan, or they were through Oman, but so it's Israel and the United States figuring out what their next move is going to be. And what Iran has done very cleverly here is basically they've now pivoted. So up until this point, and here's an important slight change here, the United States was setting the pace, even though the United States is kind of waffling around with their blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This is potentially a major shift. Whereas if Iran takes any action, then the United States has to respond to Iran at a time when the U.S. is probably not so comfortable getting into any kind of a protracted exchange with the Iranians by virtue of the fact the United States is running low on munitions. They need time to restock, resupply, to fortify positions, and Israel is in the same dilemma as well. So by doing this, the other thing is it's smart what they're doing, and maybe also to create international pressure, as I said before, on Israel, on the U.S. So changing the blame from Iran as their international stock rises, as their credibility as a rational state actor rises, and as Israel and the U.S., especially the U.S., it drops, it continues to crater. That means that more countries will be putting some kind of pressure or political pressure, or at least rhetoric or noise, who knows. Certainly in public opinion, it's going to show out in polls that the real obstacle to peace and stability in West Asia is Israel and the United States who's supporting it. And something needs to change there. And if that means a cessation of hostilities against Lebanon, then so be it. And that really works against the United States and Israel's long-range goal with Lebanon is the United States and Israel are working together to try to foment a civil war. The U.S., the Trump administration, and the Netanyahu regime, okay, they want to foment a bloody civil war in Lebanon, and they're not making any secret about it. They want to turn the Lebanese armed forces against Hezbollah, okay, for no other reason than to create a maelstrom of chaos and division so that Israel can move forward unimpeded while the Lebanese fight each other. Israel will move forward to steal Lebanese territory more than ever before. That is the master plan. That's what Trump wants. That's what the U.S. wants. That's what Israel wants. Everything else you're seeing is, in terms of negotiations, is play acting. Israel wants to seize land. They have land. They've stolen a very important and strategic chunk of Syria. They'll never give it back. It's permanently annexed. They'll wait years to formalize it, but they're going to do that. They're attempting to do that in Gaza right now. They're very close to doing it, and they want to do that with South Lebanon, not just up to the Litani River. No. They want a buffer zone after the Litani River. Hezbollah is putting up great resistance to this. That Hezbollah is an indigenous South Lebanese armed resistance movement, but it's labeled as a terrorist organization by the U.S., Britain, most European countries, as well as Israel. Okay, So because it's designated as a terrorist organization, their political wing and their military wing, that means that gives Israel the free hand to do whatever it wants in terms of collateral damage. In the eyes of the West, that's just collateral damage in the war on terror. End of argument. So that's one of the problems, is that while Hezbollah can put up a resistance against Israel, and will continue to probably resist them even if they fully occupy all of South Lebanon, and they won't give up resisting them for years. But that's not going to also mean that Israel isn't going to be bombing and basically scorched earth, leveling, flattening more villages and cities and towns, including historic cities in South Lebanon. And unfortunately, those are the new rules of the game. That's the West has shown that they're the United States, the British government, the French, the EU, the Germans, and of course Israel, who's perpetrating this, but they're okay with genocide. That's the West, Canada, everybody. They support full-blown scorched earth genocide. They don't mind massive slaughter of civilians, women, children, young men, etc. Infrastructure, schools, universities, hundreds of thousands of homes have already been destroyed in South Lebanon already. And the West, the democratic West, is 100% in support of this. Okay, that shows you those are Western values in 2026. That's the problem. That means they've given Israel the green light to continue this policy. Nobody has stopped them. There's no sanctions coming from any of these countries. There's still Russia in Europe. Meanwhile, Israel is conducting a genocide on 3 fronts. 4, if you count what the Israeli defense minister said recently about Iran, threatening them with complete annihilation. But let's just say Gaza, West Bank, and South Lebanon, or just Gaza and South Lebanon. Just that, at least 2, bona fide cases of an ongoing genocide. When you're threatening to third biggest city in Lebanon is Tyre, and they're saying evacuate, leave, or you're dead. Basically, you're seeing the forced displacement of millions of people within Lebanon, IDPs, internally displaced persons. What is that? Ethnic cleansing under threat of death? I think that's attempted genocide. Personally, that's what the international law and the legal argument says. That hasn't changed. That's in the Genocide Convention. And they're doing it again. So they're going to continue, unfortunately. And that's not great for the Hezbollah. It's not great for the people who live in South Lebanon. But this is the new reality. And until that changes, we cannot rely on any rule books that we might have in the past. To me, that's the big problem. That's the difference between now and 2006 and also 2000, is that Israel was playing by a different set of rules back then. We're using proxies to govern the South under occupation, the South Lebanese army, or whatever that dodgy proxy force they were running and brutalizing the population when Israel occupied South Lebanon. They're playing by a softer set of rules. It was brutal. It was terrible. But the rules they're playing on now, it's just total annihilation. And they're daring the international community to do something about it. Well, there's one country that is going to potentially do something about it, which is Iran. Right. And the thing Israel has to be worried about, which the U.S. is very worried about, is as soon as they do have any kind of permanent encampments in South Lebanon and bases, Iran will at some point target them with missiles and obliterate those Israeli military encampments. They'll destroy them, all their equipment and their soldiers and whatever. So Iran hasn't pulled that card yet, but they can, and with very high degree of accuracy, as we've seen with previous missile strikes. And that's to say nothing about what Hezbollah would do in coordination at that time if those attacks happen. That could be devastating for Israel. But even then, Danny, That's not going to stop Israel from its scorched earth policy in South Lebanon, unless Iran puts such pressure on them militarily, Israel, that they have to somehow, and it becomes such a crisis, and Trump is pulling his fake orange hair weave out, that it's going to force some kind of pressure that, no, Israel, you're gonna stop now. You're gonna have to, you know, observe some kind of a ceasefire. That's that, but that moment has not happened yet. That's the thing. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe we'll get there, but not yet.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, as we've been talking, Patrick, the results of this call are in, and as you said, Iran is the only country, especially in the region, that will do anything about this. And it seems like Iran's threats have, what is being said by Khan media, Israeli media, has postponed the expanded Lebanon operation. But everyone should be reminded that Israel, the United States, of course, by its side. That's all they do is postpone. They don't stop the general trend and arc of warmongering, expansionism, and genocide, as you outlined, Patrick. But that's what's happened now, and I find it very interesting that it took Iran's warning that it would hit the northern occupied territories of so-called Israel for that to occur. Nothing Trump did. Trump is saying that he doesn't even care if negotiations are over. But there's this other thing, Patrick, that's going on, which is there's some economists who are saying a couple weeks in June, we could be looking at a total economic disaster, much worse than what people are already experiencing now, both in the United States and around the world. So, your thoughts about this latest development here?
Yeah, the economic clouds are definitely forming, and that's going to happen. I mean, you're already seeing moves by the Europeans to try to head off some of the potential shock waves on this by trying to raise the price. They have this crazy cap on Russian oil, that Russian oil can't be sold. They're trying to enforce this crazy $45 a barrel or something like that. So they're now ruminating about that issue, and they're probably going to raise it to $65 a barrel, even though Siberian crude is trading at 85 plus. So that's a signal by the Europeans that they're anticipating severe market shortages, and trying to head off and release some of the pressure on that. And they're very staunchly anti-Russian. You know how anti-Russian the Europeans are. That's their whole reason for living, is to be anti-Russian and to show they're tough on Russia, and just the economic suicide pact that Europe has with itself is a bizarre thing. But to see them having to, preemptively prepare and give way on that is incredible. That means that this is serious. So there will be that's going to be very, very bad for the American economy, which is already in a kind of inflationary cycle. But you wouldn't know that if you're reading Breitbart News or Breitbart News alerts or watching Fox. So that's perhaps some pressure that the United States is looking at, and that's why Trump maybe wanted to sort of declare that there's some deal happening. They're really problematic, though, because the one of the lead Iranian envoys, Ghalibaf, he's basically made statements like, "We don't trust the United States that they'll make good on any promises at all on anything." And it's true. That's a logical position. Why, even if there was a memorandum understanding, yeah, you'll see the stock market go up, you'll see oil go down, and there'll be sort of temporary celebration there. The Trump family can lock in its profits from its put options and its various margin calls and whatnot on the stock and stuff like that. Everyone make their money, but the situation hasn't fundamentally changed that much on the ground with this. So, yeah, that's on the economic front. There'd be pressure on Trump. A deal would have to entail some kind of financial arrangement. with Iran, this is hugely problematic in terms of unfreezing assets, lifting sanctions. Almost impossible. Almost impossible in the United States. The only thing that Trump could do is unilaterally create some kind of a reparations fund, which it looks like they're disguising as a reconstruction investment fund or something like that. And Trump would tends to do is make big announcements, like we're starting a new fund. There's going to be $300 billion in it. It's going to be big. We're going to rebuild that country, and they're going to bring in some U.S. firms to help rebuild Iran. So he can paint that as a win. But where's that money going to come from? Where's it going to come from? The Gulf states? Are they going to pay for that? I don't think so. I mean, it's going to have to come from some of it, at least half of it, from America, and that's like basically that the Laura Loomers of the world and the Mark Levines of the world are going to be like, they're giving money to terrorists. It's going to go straight into the hands of Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas. They're going to be more beheaded babies, kind of thing. That's where it ends up. So if Trump can weather that storm from the Israeli mouthpieces and all these kind of people in his orbit, the Israeli lobby crowd and all of this stuff, if he can do that, great. I don't see him doing that. So I don't see any real progress on some of those really key points that the U.S. they're just not. It's kind of depressing to think that they're not actually capable of bringing the ball over the goal line on the key points. That's the scary part about this. So he's going to waffle in this kind of purgatory of between war and war breaking out again and negotiations, and just kind of waffle in the middle, I guess, and then they can try to justify themselves. Pete Hegseth, the White House, to say, well, privately, we're buying time to rearm and reload, and Israel's also buying time for the exact same reason, and that they could reserve the right to resume hostilities at any point in the future. Maybe is that the de facto position? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump has just, Patrick, again, Truth Social, the foreign policy information arm of Washington. Donald Trump posted this just as you were talking just 7 minutes ago. I had a very productive call with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel. There will be no troops going to Beirut, and any troops that are on their way have already been turned back. Likewise, through highly placed representatives, I had a very good call with Hezbollah, and they agreed that all shooting will stop, that Israel will not attack them, and they will not attack Israel. Donald J. Trump. So there's obviously some narrative management going on, and definitely some desperation here, because if Donald Trump didn't care, he would not be intervening to try to manage the narrative again. But we've seen this before at the beginning of the so-called ceasefire. What's your thoughts about this? I don't think Iran is going to be fooled by any of this, but what say you?
That's the point. That's the point, Danny. Let's establish some ground rules, okay? He can say and tweet out what he wants. Donald Trump says he's talking to high-level Hezbollah representatives. Really? Are you really? So let's establish some ground rules, okay? Hezbollah, whether they're talking directly or through intermediaries, there's no way they're going to trust the U.S. or Israel to abide by their word on anything. Period. Never again. It's just not going to happen unless there are credible international powers that act as guarantors to an agreement. That's different, okay? But that can't happen because Trump doesn't operate that way. Doesn't do multilateralism. Iran is never going to trust the United States. Any promises, they can write down memorandums of understanding. They can put draft proposals together. Iran is never going to ever trust the word of this administration. period, ever. Ditto for Hamas and the Palestinian delegation. That's it. Where and Yemen too, if you want to throw them in there. Where does that leave us? That's the reality of it. Take away the truths, the U.S. media, the talking points, the fake stories planted in Axios. The latest fake one, I can't remember what it was. It was that president of our Pezeshkian, the
Oh,
Iranian president.
resigned. He resigned, right?
He was going to resign because he was worried about IRGC influence in Iranian affairs. Are you kidding me? Like, who made that one up? And the Jerusalem Post are running with it. So they have their own little ecosystem of information and propaganda, and these are sort of like sunbursts. They're like a wounded jet fighter that's unloading all of its sunbursts to avoid getting a direct hit from Iran. That's what all of these media little PR games are. I can't imagine what exactly was the productive objective of putting out this story that Pezeshkian was going to resign. I don't get it. Where's the benefit there? Like, how do you leverage that into some kind of a benefit? Because it can't affect the Iranians really. Other than they can laugh about it. Then it must be for domestic consumption, right? That's the only explanation. But it's just utterly ridiculous. Even Marco Rubio wouldn't fall for that. I mean, it's so obviously ridiculous. The IRGC runs, Iran's at war. IRGC has a mandate to protect the country. End of discussion. That's how it goes. Supreme leader, IRGC. The president is the political leader and representing the legislature and the domestic politics. They're at war. Iran's at war. So it's IRGC. That's it. So it's a ridiculous story. Anyway.
Yeah, especially when Pezeshkian, especially the president of Iran, has the military, has the IRGC to thank for his life. I mean, he was almost killed in the June war. They targeted him. Israel did.
Yep.
So it would be ridiculous that there's been no statements to the contrary, that somehow this so-called made up, it seems like a mostly made up internal struggle within the military and the less hardliners versus the hardliners, all of this. It seems all made up. But at the end of the day, there's also a lot of what seems to be just market manipulation. And it seems like it all comes down to every single report. This is what is actually stunning about this and why I believe there's so much misinformation. They've consolidated Israel and the U.S. They're reporting on a war right now almost to a singular person in Axios, Barak Ravid, who was a former operative of Unit 8200, Israeli intelligence Mossad. Now he works for Axios. He's been around the block, Western mainstream media, unsurprising, given the close links between U.S. and Israeli intel and Western corporate media. But this is what it's come to. Almost every single report about these negotiations has been from him, and he has literally released stories that now just ordinary people using X are saying, this looks like you're just making up things at this point and putting it out there to manipulate markets and maybe shift the narrative away from the reality. But what do you make of this, especially this singular outlet with a singular so-called reporter who just happens to be a former Israeli operative?
Yeah, I mean, we were calling that out a while ago. It was getting suspicious. Axios. They do cover some U.S. domestic politics, ineffectual sort of inside baseball, Democrats and Republicans, and legislative stuff. They cover all that, and it's accurate if you're interested in that. It's just grist for the mill for the political conversation, just like Politico or something like that. But on foreign policy stuff, Axios is a dumpster fire, basically. It's terrible. And they're involved in disinformation, active disinformation. And I think Israel has their plant in that organization, and they can just stovepipe and feed all sorts of garbage through there. And it helps to sort of reinforce the same sort of information ops that they're running through other outlets. The Pozeskian story was interesting. It was an anonymous source reported to Iran International, which isn't, again, that one's not even a real media outlet. That's basically a clearinghouse for Israeli anti-Iranian propaganda and Pahlavi pro-royalist propaganda. It's I think it was based in the U.S. Previously, and it's moved to the U.K. It's changed hands, but it's a seems to me like a spook shop, because they just put out so much fake news. It's they led the charge on all that. 50,000 protesters slaughtered by the Ayatollah in the street. They were running point on a lot of that, along with a whole host of fake Iranian, quote, human rights organizations based around the corner from Langley, Virginia, and various and sundry other places like New York and Toronto, funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, seriously, but so yeah, Axios unfortunately is in that category. So they don't have a lot left, but this idea of shorting the markets and then also making money on the rebound after the dip, whatever the case is on any of these announcements for the S&P 500 or on the oil markets, oil futures. I think in poly market, so much money has been made. These are not trivial sums of money, and a lot of people have made money, and we don't even know. They picked out some of these poly market cases where it was clearly insiders, actually people within the U.S. military or attached to or around the Trump cabinet. So that's been proven. It's been shown. We have no idea what's happening at the institutional level, at the Goldman Sachs level, all these other Wall Street firms that have all of their trades shielded and hidden through various other shells, or it goes into a volume of activity, and maybe they're doing multiple smaller trades to sort of dilute the focus and attention on that sort of insider trading on these very same transactions. We have really no idea. It would take a massive congressional panel investigation, major project for the SEC, which Trump, as far as we heard, has gutted of any serious people in there that would be able to look into this or stop this sort of thing. It would take a massive effort, and that would have to be spearheaded by the government. Well, if the government's involved in the corruption, the likelihood of that happening, it's not going to happen. It might happen under a Democrat administration if they came into power in 20, or maybe perhaps after the midterms. There's a chance that could happen, but still, Trump has done a very, very good job strategically of getting rid of certain people and reshaping the DOJ and the SEC to the point where, Sam Bankman-Fried went down with that massive crypto Ponzi operation, FTX, where he was using his fake tokens as collateral to get real finance loans. I mean, just fraud. And that exact same business structure, Donald Jr. and Eric Trump and World Liberty Financial are effectively have done. The difference is the SEC has been gutted. That's the difference. So, otherwise they'd be cool in it with Sam Bankman at the country club, playing video games, serving out their time, but that's not going to happen, unfortunately. It's crazy, so there's so much of that going